talked about who some of the people represent, and we'll kind of go back over that again. So who's the land owner on this? Who is the land owner in this parable? God is the landowner. And who is the husbandman?
God is the landowner.
No.
And who is the husbandman?
No. I hate to say no, but no, the prophets are not the husbandman here.
No. And who is the husbandman? No.
Who are the husbandmen here?
Prophets are not the husbandman here.
Israel, leaders of Israel.
Leaders of Israel. And it's not just the Pharisees and Sadducees that we see at this time period. It even goes back to the kings as well.
It's not just the Pharisees and
Who are the first servants that get sent out?
It even goes back
And
to the kings as well. It's not just the Pharisees.
who are the first servants that get sent out?
Well,
The prophets. Right. You were correct on that. They are the prophets.
Who are the first servants that get sent out?
Because they go out and they
Prophets.
try to bring back the fruits and guide things. And we also find in there who are the other servants
They try
that
to
we
bring back
find.
the fruits and guide things. And we also find
It
in
says
there
that they sent out other servants.
that we find. And guide things. And we also find it says that they sent out other servants.
The apostles and the other disciples that went, because they went out also. Remember, Christ sent them out, the 72 out together to go out and to preach, and also then sent the apostles out in a second time. Who's the Son?
And to preach, and also then sent
Christ.
the apostles out.
And so we went through and we
Who's the
talked
Son?
about what happened to the servants that got sent.
We talked about
Some were beaten, some were killed. In fact, the second set that went out, they were killed as well. So what was the idea then of
in fact, the second
the landowner?
they were killed as well. So
Who was he going to send?
what was the idea then?
His son, because why?
They'll respect him.
They will respect him because his
son, because why?
when we take a look at a landowner, the landowner's not going to live forever.
They will
So
respect him
the
because
son
he is
inherits the land, and so he should be the person also that gets respected because he'll be in charge.
the land, and so he should be the
And with that said, what did the husbandman think about the son when he came? What was their idea?
With that said, what did the husbandman think
for them,
about
then
the
there has
son?
to be others that would come before them.
He came.
Yes, they had no respect for the son. And what did they plot to do and why?
Kill him. We'll be able to get the property
Yes, they
then.
had no respect
Right.
for the son. And what did they plot
And
to
so
do?
that was their whole idea.
Kill him.
They wanted they wanted that son's inheritance because without the son, evidently the landowner had no other heirs, so they would have the property. There would be no one there to dispute with them, and they would stay in charge. So when we take a look at the Jewish leaders, and when we get down to the son, those husbandmen are the Pharisees and Sadducees. What have they been plotting to do? To kill the son, to kill Christ. And so Christ is likening the kingdom to this, and this is what has been transpiring. All the things leading up to Christ, Christ comes. I mean, how many of the prophets went through and talked to the evil kings of the northern kingdom? And what happened to them? They were beaten, they were killed. In fact, didn't Christ tell the Pharisees and Sadducees, this is what you guys did? You killed the prophets. So this parable is about the history of basically once the kingdom of Israel started with earthly kings. There were some good kings, mostly in Judah, but there were a lot of bad kings too, and they would not listen to the prophets. That actually was prophesying the truth, and so they killed them to go ahead and do what they wanted to do, so that they could remain in charge. So we get on down with this story. So what does Christ ask after all of this story goes on? Yeah, what do you think the landowner should do? And what did the Pharisees and Sadducees say? Yeah, they ought to destroy those wicked men. Kill them. Get rid of them. So, did they really understand what they were answering when they said this? They had no idea. So we take a look, but on that, with that answer of as far as destroying them, what did he say? What did they say after the wicked husbandmen were destroyed? What should the land go to? Other tenants or other land, other husbandmen that will give God his due. And so we didn't ask that. So who are these other husbandmen? The Gentiles. And so here we find we're talking with the Jews first, and then when they reject Christ, they reject the Gospels, they go over to the Gentiles. Do we have one more? Yeah. So, do they finally understand what Jesus is saying at the end of this story? And what do they want to do?
They still want to seize him, but they say, you know what? The people think that he's, a prophet, so we need to,
They still fear the people, don't they?
Yeah.
Because again, Christ has come in, and this is still back from when he makes the journey into Jerusalem, and people are cheering, yelling hosannas at him, and I mean, they want to lay hands on him, and they just can't. So, what other comments do we have on this parable here that you see that we need to take a look at? Marvin? Chuck's on his way.
I think you made a good point the other day when this reminds you of David when he was told, and it's a similar story. It's pretty easy to understand, and almost anybody can understand it when it doesn't apply to them. But then when you start getting a little personal about it, and I'm going to have to make some changes, and I can't do what I want, well, then I've got a problem with it. So the basic message that God has for us is follow him, and it's pretty easy to understand. But then when you start making excuses or reasons why you don't want to, then that's where the problems come.
And don't you think that some of us sometimes have that problem, same problem? I mean, who was the Jewish leadership, the Pharisees and Sadducees? Were they the top dogs in as far as Jewish leadership? Sanhedrin court? Didn't they make the rules and kind of rule the Jewish? Go back to Marvin there, Chuck.
To your point, I think that's where a lot of us start with. I'm right. Everybody else is wrong. I'm right. So as long as everything fits with what I believe and what I want, then I'm okay with it. So to your point, they thought that they made the rules and that they understood. So they were okay with it until it started contradicting what they believed or were kidding themselves to believe.
So, and I take a look at like supervisors or plant managers or commanders. Don't you think it would be hard for a commander to step down and then be subordinate to somebody else over him? Yes, no. Same thing with the supervisor. Maybe a supervisor says, hey, this supervision stuff is really hard. I get all this stuff thrown on me. I'm getting fed up. I'm just put me out here on the line. Don't you think sometimes that would be hard for a supervisor to take a step back and then have somebody else telling him what to do when he was the one? And that's what we see with the Pharisees. They have all this power. They had this power, and they're afraid of losing it. And so that's why when you take a look at the parable here, when Christ talks about the husbandman wanting to steal the inheritance by killing the son, they would retain that power. Any other comments before we go to the questions? Okay, let's take a look at question number 6. What did the husbandman, vine dressers, do to the men sent by the landowner?
Beat him and kill him.
Beat them and killed them. And stoned some of them. Wasn't just beaten, some of them were stoned. And we talked about who represents those individuals. Is what I said right or wrong, or do you have something different or think something different? Go ahead and put that up. Okay. Does that make sense who those folks are? Okay. So what did the husbandman do to the son? They killed him. And I put down Matthew 21, 38 through 39. And the thing is, it wasn't just that they came and they killed him. They actually discussed amongst themselves. So it wasn't something that was just spontaneous. It was something that was planned out of malice. It was that they had planned this. What did Jesus' audience say should happen to the wicked husbandman? Yes, they should be killed. They should be destroyed. And I also put on there that the vineyard then should be given to other husbandmen. What did they not understand they were doing when they answered this way? They were condemning themselves, but when they said the other husbandmen, did they understand that who those other husbandmen were? No, they didn't understand that. Okay, we're talking about Gentiles here. Question number 9. Once they understood what Jesus' meaning of the parable, what did some of the Jews want to do?
Seize and kill him.
They wanted to lay hands on him, but they feared the people, right? So they didn't. Again, they feared the people that they would get down on them.
Afraid of that multitude. I think they probably had a little movement to their stride there.
They may have. I mean, they probably went away like a dog or a puppy that's been beaten or something, and walked away with their tail between their legs and just kind of whimpered away. So it brings us to the next parable, And that's the parable of the wedding garment. And if someone would read Matthew 22, verses 1 through 14. And whoever would like to read that, please raise your hand and Chuck will get there to you. Matthew, Wanda, are you going to read? Great.
And Jesus answered and spoke to them again by parables and said, The kingdom of heaven is like a certain king who arranged a marriage for his son, and sent out his servants to call those who were invited to the wedding, and they were not willing to come. Again he sent out other servants, saying, Tell those who are invited, See, I have prepared my dinners, my oxen and fatted cattle are killed, and all things are ready to come to the wedding. But they made light of it and went their ways, one to his own farm, another to his business. And the rest seized his servants, treated them spitefully, and killed them. But when the king heard about it, he was furious, and he sent out his armies, destroyed those murderers, and burned up their city. Then he said to his servants, The wedding is ready, but those who were invited were not worthy. Therefore, go into the highways, and as many as you find, invite to the wedding. So those servants went out into the highways and gathered together all whom they found, both bad and good, and the wedding hall was filled with guests. But when the king came in to see the guests, he saw a man there who did not have on a wedding garment. So he said to him, Friend, how did you come in here without a wedding garment? And he was speechless. Then the king said to the servants, Bind him hand and foot, take him away, and cast him into outer darkness. There will be weeping and gnashing of teeth, for many are called, but few are chosen.
Thank you. Appreciate that. So within the questions itself, it doesn't ask this, so I kind of put this down on my sheet. So who is the certain king in this parable? It's God. Who is the Son? Christ. Who are the servants in this parable? And I'll give you a hint. It's not the servants that was in the last parable. At least by my estimation, anyway. How about the apostles and disciples? Okay? Who are the other servants? Anybody got a mirror? Christians, it's us, or the other servants. Who are those who were called to be bidden in the first part? The first people to be invited. Huh?
He invited his friends and those closest to him to come in. And
But who does that represent?
Gail said Israelites.
Israelites, the Jewish nation, the Jews. They were bidden first to come to the wedding feast. And what is the city?
Kingdom or church or
What's the city here?
city.
Yeah, I know that's kind of hidden. What's the city? I'm looking for a specific city. Jerusalem. That's the city here. And who are those that are on the highways and those that could be found?
Gentiles.
Gentiles, all nations. Those are the people that are out there. And quite important, what is the wedding garment? That's putting on Christ, isn't it? Putting on Christ. And so that is your wedding garment, by putting on Christ. Those are just some of the things that I found in this parable that kind of needed to be identified. So as we take a look at this parable then, this is, the kingdom is like, first we talked about just the Gentiles in the first parable that we talked about. Then we talked about the parable of the kings, and then bringing in the Gentiles with the second one, with the wicked husbandman. And here we're talking about basically after all of this, because we're talking about what here? What are we talking about here? The wedding, right? And yes, it is the judgment, because what happens at judgment? What is presented to Christ? His bride, right? And who is the bride?
Church.
The church. And so here we're now talking about the wedding, which we're talking about the end. And so that's why when we talk about the other servants that went out, it's us. We're still living in this parable, because judgment hasn't happened. The church has not been presented to Christ as his bride yet. And so that wedding is yet still in the future. But some of the things have already happened. So let's take a look at this. What kind of comments do people may have on this parable here? That you see that is maybe pretty.
The one time to the wedding, this was the second time. And this is like we have today. Usually you have someone who's got a second chance, but not always. You should go on the first chance.
Okay.
He invited them, and he wanted everybody to come. This was his son he was putting forth, and they were rejecting his son.
And so with this wedding, what do we have with this wedding? What has the father set out?
Invitation, an offering.
An offering, invitation. But there's a great feast there, right? Who doesn't respond to an invite when there's food? When we were young and Debbie said, hey, we've been invited to go over to so and so, are we eating? Well, the answer is yes. If the answer was no, that doesn't mean that no, we're not going to go. But if there's food involved, yes, there's no question about it. So I mean, here was a feast, and what has God set before us? A phenomenal feast, isn't it? I mean, there's blessings untold. I mean, we couldn't name all the blessings that we have being in Christ. And when this wedding takes place, to be invited, to be there, and to have that wedding garment on. What is heaven like? Because that's what we're talking about. There is a great feast there. A great feast. And do we want to go? Well, there's food there. Yes. I want to be there. Is there actual food? No. But we will be fed with food that we will hunger no more. We'll drink of the water where we will thirst no more. There'll be no more wants and needs, no more pain, no more tears. How much more is that invitation, John?
I was talking with actually Brace, I think it was last week, and we were talking about basically why Jesus came. the why. And I think this parable kind of helps us as the king arranged a marriage for his son. It's like, we're talking about fellowship. We're talking about intimacy. We're talking about, as the bride comes down, and the veil is lifted, in weddings today, and finally seeing the promised one. And all of a sudden faith is made sight. And to read about, the different people's reactions, because there were different reactions that, some made light of it. Well, others, they were more spiteful. And then you had others still who were unprepared when it was all said and done. But it's sad because they're missing out on the fellowship that the Father wants for his Son. Why did Jesus come? The Father, in his wisdom, is looking for companionship for Jesus. At least that's a part of it, I think, at least from this parable.
So when we take a look at that, and I guess there's one more actor in this parable. Who is the person that came without their wedding gown or their wedding garment? So perhaps he had not put on Christ, or at one point maybe he had put on Christ, but had soiled the garments and no longer had the garments. And yet, standing before God, he's not chosen, is he? And what does this kind of remind you of when we take a look at this? What happens to the guy with that didn't have his wedding garment?
Thrown out. And just as Jesus told them, there are going to be many of you that say, Lord, Lord, I've done this in your name. And he's going to say, no, I don't know you. I don't have that fellowship with you.
Exactly. Someone get 2 Corinthians 5 and read verse 10.
For we must all appear before the judgment seat of Christ. Everyone may receive the things done in his body, according to that he hath done, whether it be good or bad.
So we're going to be there. The question is, will we have our garment on or not? And we'll certainly find out at that time. And it'll certainly be there in Matthew 25, and it is, I think, verses 32 through 34 and also 41, where Christ is separating out the sheep from the goats. We don't want to be the goat. We want to be one of his sheep. Any other comments that we have on this parable here? Anyone? Okay, let's go through the questions. Okay, what is the kingdom like? Okay, king who arranged a marriage for his son. That's verse 2, and I even included in there verse 3 that servants were called to bid them to the wedding. How do people initially respond to the invitation? Gail?
Verse 8 begins to tell that they were sent out. He sent out his servants. These servants were the prophets of old, to call them who were the Jews invited to the wedding. That's the kingdom of heaven. And they were not willing to come.
They made excuses too. I mean, I've
right.
got something else to do.
And that kind of reminds you of another parable somewhere else where people made the excuse of what? I bought a piece of land. Yeah, I got a new wife. Got a yoke of oxen. Today it would be I got a brand new tiller. I need to get it out there and till up that garden, or a brand new tractor with a plow. Yeah. So there were people who would not come. There in verse 3. So in question number 12, what happened to the second set of servants sent out? No. But they did more than what the others, they just didn't come. What happened to some of these servants? What happened to Peter and John and
They got
Paul?
mistreated, killed.
They were beaten, they were thrown in jail, oh yeah. And then some were slew. James and Stephen. I mean, we find that the next set of servants that went out, they were killed. They were killed. Because of the rejection of some, who would be invited to the wedding?
Everyone. The good, it says the good, the bad, which is, yeah, as you spoke of earlier, all nations.
And see, if you hadn't read that, you might have said the good, the bad, and the ugly. Going back to Westerns here, but the ugly's not in there. But even the ugly are invited. I mean, so all of them are now invited. What was expected of the guests? And so on having the proper garments, I know that I was reading into something. Does anybody know anything about the wedding feasts of this time period of garments and stuff? I mean, people had to dress for the occasion. I mean, there's some places where you have to have a collar shirt and a tie, maybe even a jacket. And there's some places, if you don't have a tux, you're not getting in. And so those are the highfalutin places. So in this, they had to have garments. And there were probably some people who were invited sometimes. Maybe they didn't have a garment, or maybe they were too poor to have a garment. And there were times that the person doing the invitation would supply a garment for them to wear, is some of the things that I read. Jim?
You had to be wearing a tie. And so you'd go and you didn't have a tie on, maitre d'd give you one.
Yeah, there were some places that they actually had ties. Some places would be like the den of thieves and stuff, and they'll want to sell it to you at an exorbitant rate. But still, there are places where you have to dress. You have to dress. It's not just I'm coming in on my jeans. I'm not coming in business casual like. You will come dressed. So then the question is, what is meant by many are called, but few are chosen?
Or that there would be a narrow way to get there and a broad way to get there. And he expected his to come the narrow way. And that will be a harder way to get there.
And so when we take a look at the person without the garment, that was basically that person's life, isn't it? Wasn't a Christian, or if it was a Christian, maybe that garment is torn, maybe that garment is soiled, and certainly if you have to go dressed in a suit and tie to a place, that suit is torn, if it's soiled, if you're not getting in. And so that's judgment. The garment is having Christ on, our deeds, the things that we do. It's who we are. Chuck?
Well, as you say, everybody's invited. Many are called. Everybody's called. You're welcome. And some people say, well, then they're select people. No, there's a standard which you need to meet. You have to have the garment on. Those are the ones that actually accept that call, and they're the ones that are, because you've lived up to the standard. That's the chosen ones, the ones that have lived up to the standard.
Well, if you've got the garment on, that signifies that you have done that. Just like when you take,
You've answered the call,
you've answered the call,
the
but
invitation, or
But if you've got the
Accept-
garment,
Yeah.
you've put on Christ, it's not ripped, it's not soiled, it's not torn. You've done the things that you need to do to be, as a Christian, to serve God. Those that don't have the garment have not served God. They may have put Christ on at one point, but they are not living up to what is expected. And the guy that didn't have the garment wasn't dressed as he was expected to be dressed.
And to look at it into, the wedding analogy, it's such a good one because, we've seen that in this day and age where, weddings and funerals and people are getting more and more casual. And, and when it comes to religion and when it comes to the kingdom, people are becoming more and more casual. And this gentleman, what he's doing, and the king calls him friend, but he says, friend, how did you get in here without a wedding garment? And what this individual was doing was actually the same thing the previous ones were doing when it says they made light of it.
Right.
By not wearing a wedding garment, he was disrespecting the son and the king and the invitation. He was making light of it. He wasn't taking it seriously, even though he was there. The others weren't even there. He's there, but he's not taking it seriously. And he's condemned with the others.
Jim, and then got Andrew over here, Chuck. This Jim.
Just to add to what Chuck was saying about, being qualified, doing the right thing. Matthew 7:13, enter by the narrow gate, for the gate is wide and the way is broad that leads to destruction, and many are those who enter by it. For the gate is small, and the way is narrow, leads to life, and few are those who find it.
Andrew. Watch it, Chuck. They just put that there.
Much peril. To kind of add to what John said as well, there's more and more prevalent narrative in mainstream religious ideas that kind of erases the distinction between being called and being chosen. And to them, being called is all that's necessary, and everyone's called, and you're immediately saved as you are with nothing more to do. And so what's shown here is that the call needs a response, and the call needs action in order to be fulfilled. And everybody who was called wasn't already wearing the garment when they were called, but they had to put it on, and they had to prepare themselves. They couldn't be chosen if all they heard was the call and then expected to blend in with the crowd without having made the proper preparations. So there is a distinction, and the world often wants to erase those and say, if you're called, that's it. Everyone's called the same. Nobody has to change. But that's not what Jesus is speaking about here.
Exactly. And it kind of, we'll get Audrey. And it kind of reminds me back when Christ talks about knowing people by their fruit. I mean, certainly you could tell who had the garment on and who didn't have their garment on. Audrey?
You know, the way we're talking about it, some people might misunderstand that, you know, that it's a somewhat snobbish or something like that, but it's not that at all. I mean, you are, you feel the need to obey, and you feel the need to submit, and you realize, maybe not totally at the time of baptism, but enough to realize that you need Christ as your Savior, and you need that forgiveness. And as you grow, you realize the wonderful blessings that you have. And so I mean, you're the winner. You are the biggest winner that could, you know, if you're talking about winners and losers, you're the biggest winner ever.
Who here likes to be on a losing team? I mean, when we take a look at the scriptures, especially Revelation, who wins? God wins, doesn't he? Wouldn't we want to be on God's team? And so when we take a look at even baseball teams or football teams, a lot of them are called to come to the team, right? Do all of them play? Are they all of them chosen to play? No, they're not. And so we are all invited. We may answer the call, but we have to take care of that garment in order to be chosen. In order to be chosen. Any other comments?
What keeps jumping out at me, all these beautiful parables, these stories they were truths, they were gold truths, they was perfect teaching. And these here elders, the Pharisees, the scribes, they would perceive that he was talking about them. Well, they got it right, say they were seeking his demise. They finally got it accomplished, but they couldn't keep him dead. And that's the very means of our salvation.
Absolutely. That was the last thing to be conquered, isn't it? Was death. And if Christ can conquer death, we have no fear of death, or we should have no fear of death. John?
You know, as you went through and explained, you know, who each of the characters was, and that's what you know, that's what we're called to do. And one of the characters, you know, to think about the Jews, they're going to end up using Pilate to crucify Jesus. And so they're going to use Rome, they think, to do their bidding. And they don't realize within this same parable, Rome is talked about, because it's when it talks about destroying that city, he sent out his armies. Well, who does the Lord use to destroy their city?
And who is their city?
Jerusalem.
Jerusalem.
And
that's why I asked the question, because a lot of times when we take a look at the characters, when we take a look at the things on here, it has a better understanding if you know who those folks are and what the city is, because Jerusalem is destroyed. It's not destroyed that day. It's about less than 40 years later, but still, you think maybe some of these parables and stuff that were told kind of reflect, hey, yeah, Christ talked about that. So on Sunday morning, we will go through the questions and then we'll get into 41. So I think 41 is sitting back there if you don't have it yet. Going through the questions, is that helpful or not? Do you guys write any of this stuff down, or is it helpful to write stuff down? Yes, no?